at today's gospel, it's a slightly strange gospel. We have three sort of different themes, you could almost say, going through just in a short little gospel there from Matthew, just in four verses in Matthew's gospel. We're talking about fasting and times to fast and times not to fast. And then we're talking about, you could say, sewing or garment mending. And then quickly from there it moves to, what do we do with wine? But I think this is not just about wine and how you make grapes and put grapes into wine and wine skins and so on. And I don't think this is just about mending clothes. I think what this gospel is telling us is really about how each person is meant to live their life and how each person is meant to live their life as saints in the midst of communities. Often in our world, we have expectations of what people should do. And we sort of think, oh, this person should do this person should do that. Today we celebrate the feast day of Saint Elizabeth of Portugal, whose aunt, I think, was Elizabeth of Hungary. She was named after, who was a saint as well. And people had some expectations of what Elizabeth, a little bit younger, was, what she was going to become. She was in and around in Portugal. She's married off to a prince who then becomes the king there. And unfortunately, as perhaps was typical at those times as well, the king wasn't particularly a good man in many ways. He was somewhat ruthless, he was somewhat nasty, and he was also known for being very unfaithful. And there were certain expectations that were placed upon Elizabeth in her life. But Elizabeth broke that mould. And that's the challenge, I think, for us as saints. If we just do what every previous generation and what people expect us to do, like putting new wine into old wineskins, it'll destroy. And Elizabeth said, no, she's going to be a saint in the midst of a difficult and complicated situation. And so she dedicated her life to a few things. Firstly, she dedicated her life to prayer. She's one of the first females known for praying the Liturgy of the Hours every single day. As part of the liturgy of the church, we have Mass, we have the sacraments, but we also have the hours, or sometimes referred to as the divine office. She prayed it every day. She found that brought her closer to God. This wasn't what you'd expect of a queen, but she did this. Her husband had a number of illegitimate children, perhaps as was typical at that time. The expectation of that time was that those illegitimate children were just pushed out onto the streets, nobody knew about them, and they were basically sometimes lived in poverty or were treated very badly. She said, no, these are human beings. They're to be loved, they're to be educated, they're to be formed to be saints. And she took on this even though these were not her children. Quite an incredible approach to things. After her husband died, one of her children, one of the legitimate children goes to become king. And there is a war that goes on, and she goes onto the battlefield to try to bring about peace between Spain and Portugal. This is not what people expected of a queen. They expected her to have a specific place, do specific things. All of us need to be saints in our specific context. We need to be who we are, and we need to bring that to the context of our lives today. Don't feel like we need to be what everybody else tells us what we should be, or what previous generations have said that we should be. Each of us have been uniquely created by God to be saints in our own unique way. Elizabeth did that in her unique way. I try to do that in my unique way, and hopefully each of you do as well. Don't be somebody else. And as a community, it's interesting that Jesus puts this into the gospel. He explains and teaches this. Don't put something old or something new with something old. Yes, we should bring from our tradition. That's very good. But we need to be who we are. Be new wines in new wine skins. And what we're told is that when we do this, both are preserved, both the wine and the skins. It's quite fascinating. So how can we be saints in our context? Some people have said to me, they like to compare sometimes priests to previous generations of priests, previous parish priests. We preferred this happening then, or with this happening in the past, and so on. I will be me, because God's created me to be me, not to be somebody else. And that's the same for each and every one of us. I try to be a saint. I try to respond to the goodness of what's happening in our world. And hopefully all of us do the same. Let's be new wine in fresh skins. And by doing that, we will preserve both the community and the individuals. It's a beautiful thing. Elizabeth did this. She broke the mould of her time and she became a great saint. Let's each of us break the mould of our time and not just do what culture and community expect us to do, but to actually be new saints for our world today. Saint Elizabeth of Portugal, pray for us.